Good afternoon. This is Jim Shine from Top Step Consulting. We're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Our topic is timesheets in OpenAir, best practices and tips. We're going to be going through a few items that can help you with timesheet management in OpenAir, as well as some guidelines that a lot of our clients are using to minimize disruption in their timesheet process. We're going to start with a section on some tips and tricks, how to use some of the features in OpenAir. We're going to conclude with a discussion of some best practices, policies, and procedures that your organizations can employ to ease your timesheet pain. So let's talk a little bit about timesheet setup. In OpenAir, there's an area where you can set timesheet rules. I will show you that here in the next slide. And we'll get into a discussion on that. What this settings do are allow you to set minimum and maximum amounts for daily, weekly timesheet entry, as well as a few other settings that we'll cover here in just a minute. The second bullet here is timesheet periods. Now what this is the ability to define in OpenAir which periods of time are available for people to enter time. Typically, these are in week-long increments. So you can set up a list in OpenAir that says, I'm only allowing timesheet entry for this week, last week, and the week prior, or something similar to that. And you can set up the specific dates. And with that in place, no one will be able to enter time in any other period but those. So that is a feature that if you need to restrict time entry, if you have people putting in future time or time from 2 months ago, that you can limit the ability to do that. In terms of timesheet periods, most folks, I believe, probably know this, but you also have the ability to establish your timesheets in different sets of time periods. Most of our customers are using weekly timesheets, but we have a few who are using bi-weekly or semi-monthly. We have a handful that are using daily timesheets. So every day you enter time and submit it as its own timesheet. Those options are all supported natively in OpenAir. There are a set of alerts in OpenAir that can notify your users when they have late submissions or overdue approvals. If you're not using those, you really should. They're, again, out of the box. You can find them in the timesheet administration settings. There's a good set of those that you can configure. And the last item on this list we'll also go into in more detail in a couple slides, advanced reporting. There's a timesheet status report, as well as a missing timesheet report in OpenAir's advanced reporting section. One of those is really useful. The other one is really not. So we'll go into that here in just a minute. Here's an example of the timesheet rules settings. You can set these, and we recommend using the % of work schedule for most of these, so that if you need people to input at least their allocated work schedule per day, you can set these up that these need to be the minimum number of hours required on that timesheet is a % of their work schedule, or the minimum number of hours per day is a % of their work schedule, in this case 100%. This ensures that if you have employees that are scheduled to work 8 hours a day, they are putting in no less than 8 hours a day on their timesheet, so they're accounting for all of their time. Now, I have highlighted the maximum number of hours allowed on the timesheet in red, simply because I do not recommend anyone use this. There is a strong reason to have folks enter whatever they worked. And if you cap the maximum number of hours allowed on a timesheet, you're limiting them to reporting on what they actually did. Now, setting the minimums could do the same thing. If your folks worked less than their typical work schedule, setting the minimums on here would prevent them from entering what they actually worked as well. However, in those cases, there's usually if you will, a buffer task or a buffer project where people are instructed to enter anytime they were on the bench or not actively working on something for your organization. As far as the report is concerned, this is what the advanced report looks like that's under the timesheet status report. You can set it for as many time periods as you'd like. In this case, I'm showing 2, and our time periods are set to weeks. And what I'm showing here is 4 users from that report and their timesheet status for each of those weeks. And O means they have an open timesheet for that week. And X means they haven't entered or even begun a timesheet for that week. And an S means they have submitted it. And you'll see that there's a name next to the S. That will show you all the people who are waiting, who the timesheet is waiting for approval from. So this is a good report that shows you what your timesheet situation is, who is still waiting to approve, whose timesheets have still not been entered. Now, this is dummy data, so I don't want anybody going after Ron because he hasn't entered his timesheet from last week, just to make that clear. On that same note, just briefly, the missing timesheets report sounds like it's useful. It's not for most organizations. What that report does is it takes one time period only, and it gives you a list of everybody who hasn't entered their time yet. It doesn't tell you if it's in a submitted status, an open status, not entered at all. It doesn't give you any of that information. It just gives you a list of people with no background and no information. Considering that this timesheet status report is just as easily available and much more informational, we strongly recommend not messing with the missing timesheets report and simply using the timesheet status. There's a couple of fields that we want to point out that you can use in OpenAir to enhance your timesheet reporting. One of them is the payroll type field. Now, contrary to the name, I don't know if we have any clients who are using this as an actual payroll type. It's existed in OpenAir for many, many years. The original purpose is kind of lost to the ages, but what we use it for now is to enter any kind of information that we would like on a time entry as people are putting in their time. Examples here, if you need a customer location or a work location, to say I was working in this state or that state or this country or what have you. You could use this for a number of different things that your users would then select when they enter time. It is a standard field in OpenAir. There's no customization required except potentially changing the name, which can be done through the terminology. And it is available for subtotaling on summary reports. The other field that works similarly is a time type field. Now, typically usage for this is either a billable or non-billable type status, overtime or regular, on-site or remote. So these are, again, values that a user would enter when they are entering time. Say, I was working on-site, I was working remote, if you need that information tracked. This is available via filter sets to restrict what users can put what information into them. It's also available for subtotaling on summary reports, and you can define this on a per project basis. Now, with all of that said, I put a big caution at the end of this. If you allow your users to decide what is billable and what is not, you will likely result in inconsistencies on how your billable time is reported. When I'm working with clients, I consistently recommend that they do not use this field for billable, non-billable status. And if you're wondering what the alternative is, we typically will recommend that our clients use tasks to control what's billable and what isn't, either through a task type on the task or through the use of the non-billable checkbox on the task, which transfers control of that status from the people entering time to the people managing the project. All right, time entry tab. You see a screenshot from UI3 on the bottom of the screen and a screenshot from UI4 on the side of the screen. There's an internal switch which allows this tab to be available and viewed. And this will show all time entries regardless of the timesheet they're on, the user who put them in, the date, etc. It's just a list of all of the time entries in the system. Now, if you don't filter this, first of all, the page will take quite a while to load. Secondly, it'll stop at 2,000 entries. And it'll give you a message that says there's more than 2,000, I stopped. That's not terribly useful. But when you add a custom filter to it through the standard filter process, then you can say, I want to see all the time entries for this period, for this client, for this customer, any combination of those. You can also use the drop down under the column headers to filter this down to a specific user or whomever. Where this becomes very useful is if you're trying to research how much time you've put on a certain project and how much time you've put on a certain task on that project. You can use this to display all of those time entries without having to run a detailed report. And then you can easily filter this kind of on the fly. It can be very useful. Again, this won't appear if you haven't seen this in your instance because there's an internal switch that determines if this is on or not. So you need to contact OpenAir support to have that enabled. There's a few auto-populate options for timesheets. There's a timesheet setting which allows for hours to be populated from someone's bookings as soon as the timesheet is created. So if your folks typically spend time in the same manner that they were booked for time, this can be pretty useful for them to eliminate having to enter everything manually and determine what they did. You can have it just load those bookings into your timesheet and they've got it. You can also do that even if their hours are slightly different, in that they at least have a head start and they only have to modify a few things. You can also set this up so that schedule requests that are approved in the system auto-populate on timesheets. So if someone has a paid time off request approved, that paid time off will show up on their timesheets automatically without them having to enter it. There's also the ability to clone timesheets. Now you can do that manually, where you go into the system and you click a button that says, I want to create a new timesheet that's a clone of last week's timesheet or 2 weeks ago or what have you. You can also set this up so that it's automated. As soon as you submit this week's timesheet, OpenAir will create next week's timesheet automatically. So that's a feature that some of our clients are taking advantage of. So that next timesheet is always there, always available. No one has to create a new one. You have the option when you do this to decide what you want to do with the hours. Do you want to just create a clone that loads the projects and tasks that you worked on last week, but clears all the hours because you work on different things, different amount of time from 1 week to the next? Or do you want to leave those hours the same? How do you want to handle that? So those are all options that will help your users get their timesheet set up more quickly. When all else fails, write a script or request one from us. Got a few examples of scripts that we've done for folks in relation to time. Some of these have wide appeal. Some of them are pretty specific. This first one is what we call a budget check, which validates that the timesheet's hours are less than the planned hours for that task. If it's going to go over those planned hours, there's a few things you can do. You can send an email to someone to tell them we've just gone over the hours. You can prevent the timesheet from being submitted, or at least you can have it automatically rejected if it's over the planned hours. A script can help you with a lot of those things to keep you from exceeding your budgets. There's also a budget alert, which shows your worked versus your approved hours, very similar to the budget check, but it helps you proactively and automatically determine your burn rates. So you can have notifications that show you how you're doing against budget on a frequent basis as items are submitted. We actually had one where we did an increment check for PTO. The customer wanted to ensure that no one took PTO in any increment except 4 or 8 hours. And so we put that in place. Now, again, that might not be widely useful, but it gives you an example of the kind of thing you can do with script functionality. And I should also mention that none of the scripts that we are showing here in these examples took a significant amount of time to create or test. These are all very simple exercises. I want to talk about timesheet adjustments a little bit. What you do when somebody's got their time entered incorrectly. You have the option of unapproving timesheets, which then requires the end user or some proxy to go in and enter the time correctly, and then requires a reapproval. This is the most thorough and the most audit-friendly way of correcting a timesheet. It's also the slowest. At month end, this is not an option for a lot of organizations, but it is far and away the most thorough and, as I indicated, audit-friendly. You have the option of creating an overlapping timesheet with adjustments. So you've already entered your time for a week and you put 6 hours against this task when it should have been that task. You can create an overlapping timesheet manually and put -6 hours against the task that you had initially entered that time against, and then +6 against the correct task and submit that. That also requires reapproval and can be a little bit slow as well, although usually not as slow as the unapproval. And you can also do an automatic adjustment, which does not require an end user proxy. We'll take a look at that. So an approved timesheet can be adjusted if the timesheet adjustment feature is activated, which requires an internal switch. This allows correcting a timesheet with OpenAir creating the adjusting timesheet automatically. And what you can do with this, and you can set these to be auto-approved as well, which speeds things up. What you would do is you would select this, adjust the timesheet here from the little tips icon, and it would create a timesheet that looks like the timesheet that you're trying to adjust. And then you would go into that timesheet and simply manipulate the hours to change them to what you wanted. When you're done, the system will create an adjusting timesheet that's very similar to the overlapping timesheet we talked about on the previous slide. It'll show up with the date range as the name with the word adjusted in brackets afterwards. So you know that this is the change that you made. So that's the fastest way to get this done. It's also very auditable. You can identify who adjusted and what exactly they changed. If you don't have this enabled, I strongly recommend that you do. Again, contact OpenAir support to have that turned on. All right, let's talk about some best practices of time entry. You'll find, and if you haven't thought this through, this will make sense to you. Companies and employees have a healthy conflict in the level of detail. In other words, the employee is trying to just put in, here's what I did. You know, I'm not being paid to enter time. I want to get this done quick. I want to get it done easy. It's just a nuisance. I know I have to do it. I know it's important, but I just want to get it done. Whereas the company wants to know, what did you do? When did you do it? What are the notes? How did it go? Do you have updates for what more work there is to do on this task, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely a conflict there, but it's a healthy conflict. The employee, again, they want to just provide what they've done very quickly. Project manager, just like the company needs more detail, the project manager needs more detail because they're trying to manage budgets using a detailed project plan of actions and activities. So how do you handle this? It's all in the lack of details. That's a phrase that I stole from Jody Seasai, our founder. There's a few things that we've identified here that can help balance that conflict. Make it really easy on your users to find the projects and tasks that they worked on, that they're looking for. If you're using a naming convention that is 17 characters long and has a mixture of letters and numbers to indicate the SOW number or the time period you worked on it or the phase of the project, and it looks like gibberish, frankly, that's the opposite of what we're talking about. We want these project names to be so simple that your employees have no question that this is the one they're looking for. I'm working on a QuickBooks integration. Here's QuickBooks integration for this client. That's the one. Limit their view and the project set in general to only current work. We find that a lot of our clients keep projects and tasks open well after the work is done. And the folks that worked on those projects will see them on their timesheet options well after the work is done. Most of the time they don't select them because they know better, but on occasion there's a stray time entry that goes against the wrong project and task because it's still open when it shouldn't be. There's ways to automate that as well through script functionality. We've done that, again, many times for various clients. So I would consider automating that process to prevent that. Avoid, if you can, if your finance folks will allow it, and I'm sure there's some finance folks on the phone today, avoid guessing what your future time looks like. I remember a client a few years ago who required time entry 2 days before the month end. And they would always make their folks guess what they were going to do for the last 2 days of the month. They called it an accrual. It took me a long time to understand what that word meant, not being a finance person myself. And then when the new month came, their first task was to go back and fix their guess and make it accurate. If you can avoid that, do. That makes time entry users very frustrated and causes a lot of clutter in your system. Last thing is to support, and I would say even encourage people to use the mobile app. That allows them to enter their time on their bus ride home, on their plane ride home, once folks are allowed to travel again. And OpenAir's mobile app, it's getting better with every release. They are going to be releasing a new version shortly with this April OpenAir release that looks like a significant improvement on what they've got now. So our recommendation would be to encourage the use of that mobile app. Avoid small time unit activities. I'll get into some examples here in a minute. If you've got activities broken down by the hour, consider if you really need to do that. Avoid checklist items for time capture. You don't want a time capture that says, turned on the server. It doesn't take any time to turn on the server. That's a milestone, that's a checklist. It's not a time capture item. Focus the task plan on what you really need to use to manage your budget. No lower level than that, and no higher level than that. Capture your actuals per task. Limit your tasks. So if you're using project plans that are 300 or 400 tasks, consider if you need to do that for time capture. You may need to do that for project management, but do you need to do that for time capture? It's a good question to ask. A couple examples. These are real life, real world examples from our clients. We've run out of hours on the testing task, but we have plenty of time left from requirements gathering, so put your testing time on the requirements gathering task from now on. This is a problem. It's confusing for the user. They're going to mess it up. They weren't doing requirements gathering, they were doing testing. It removes your ability to analyze any of your past time to assist with future estimations, and it's going to confuse the client if they see time details on their invoices. This is not a good idea. There are 8 hours in the project budget for module design. We've got 5 modules to consider, so we've got 5 tasks of 1.6 hours each. Make sure to put the time against the right one. Okay, so that's a bit of an exaggeration, but actually it's not. This came right from a client that we were working with, and that was their directive to their users. Our recommendation was, you're not going to get the time against the right task. This is too granular. It's frustrating for your end user. It's probably not necessary. You're probably not managing your 1.6 hour budget on each task. And then how do you classify time that's spent on work that's attributable to the design of all 5 modules? There's no task for overall module design. So again, this level of detail, may seem useful, it's not. All right. This is kind of a filler piece of information, fairly obvious. Timesheets need to reflect your business. What level of detail do you need? How do you track customer tickets, customer investment, overtime shift work? These are all questions you want to ask yourself as you're coming up with your data capture module. The idea being that these time entries are these titles. And if you get them right, you get a nice picture. And this gives you a picture of your company's work, of your billing, of your utilization, your tax reporting, etc. That is clear and accurate. And all the user has to worry about is this tile. Notifications and compliance. Define your policies for timesheet compliance. Define them, communicate them. Establish them. I walked into a client about 3 or 4 years ago, and we talked through how they wanted to do timesheet compliance. They were using OpenAir for the first time. They said, oh, we don't want to have any compliance measures at all. We want people to enter their time, but we're never going to check to see if they're late. We're never going to check to see if they've accounted for everything, because they'll quit if we do. If that's the case, not to be pejorative, but let them quit. You want policies for your timesheet compliance. You need these to run your business. Establish alerts, establish reports, decide if you want to do some kind of a wall of fame, wall of shame kind of dashboard to highlight, here's all the folks who got their timesheet in on time, or here's all the folks who didn't, depending on which approach you feel will work in your company's culture, if either will work. Establish audit reports to determine when people had their time in. Hold them accountable for this. I can give you a case study. When I was first starting out in consulting as a project manager, our department was only about 40, 50 folks, but we only had about 10 that got their timesheets in on time. We got a new vice president for consulting services. He came in, the first thing he did, he said, for every timesheet that's late, and he established a very strict deadline, here's what it is. Any timesheet that's not in by that time, you lose 1% of your bonus for the quarter. We have one guy miss his timesheet that next week. He lost 1% of his bonus for the quarter. Neither he nor anyone else ever had a problem again. And that I lived that. That's not an exaggeration. Establish those policies and put some teeth to them. And you'll find that your compliance improves and your ability to run your business improves. Last thing we wanted to present is some guidelines from the Defense Contract Audit Agency. These are the guidelines for folks who work with the Department of Defense. As you can imagine, they have a policy for most everything. Here's what they prescribe. Get your timesheet filled in every day. You don't have to submit it every day, but check to make sure it's completed every day. Contact folks who didn't complete their timesheet the previous day. Do something to ensure that this is being done every single day. If you make a change to a timesheet, there's got to be a reason associated with it. Establish what you need to get those reasons implemented. All timesheets need to go through an approval process. There shouldn't be such a thing as a self-approved timesheet if that's the only approval level. Auditors need to be able to see the history of all the changes made to the timesheet. Now with OpenAir, you don't have to worry about that. That's out of the box reporting. It's just something that the Department of Defense requires. Systems should be able to create reports to ensure daily entry compliance. Again, something you can do in OpenAir out of the box just with their reporting engine. Time charged against each code must be done accurately. Now that sounds like kind of a no-brainer, kind of a duh thing. But that goes back to what we talked about. Well, we don't have budget on this task anymore, so put your time against this other task. It's no longer accurate. It's not necessarily fraudulent. You worked on the project, but it's certainly misleading and makes your data useless for other purposes. and don't log time in the future. Again, we talked about this, the accrual situation. The Department of Defense simply doesn't allow it. And I think that's a strong recommendation. That's what we had to present today. Looks like I finished just about exactly on time, which is good. If you need anything with your OpenAir instances, if you need a review of how you're using it, any tips and tricks, any scripts that you might need, let us know. I will mention, if we haven't peppered you with information on this already, in the last couple of releases of OpenAir, they've opened up their scripting engine to be able to contact other systems. What that means is that we've been able to produce integrations to other systems without any need for a third-party tool. So we've been able to integrate OpenAir with systems such as Salesforce, Jira, Smartsheet, of course I'm losing track of them right now, QuickBooks, without the need for a third-party tool to do it. We can do it directly from an OpenAir script. Saves time, saves money, provides its own governance. It's a really good solution. We're really pleased that OpenAir has implemented that in their scripting engine. If you have any questions about that or anything else, just let us know.